Hello, everybody. I'm back. Sorry for being away for so long. I've just had some depression stuff that I really have had a hard time getting past. But thank you for being patient with me. Today we are going to talk about, first of all, my new filming setup. What do you think? Second of all, we're going to talk today about 2000s fandom. More specifically, early 2000s fandom. Now, this is a YouTube series that I've been wanting to do for a really long time, and I'm hoping that now I finally have enough motivation, inspiration, and resources to make this happen. So, strap in. I really hope you guys like this. Today, we're going to be talking about the Dream Street fandom, and more specifically, the fan movie. It's not really a fan-made movie, but it's a movie about being a fan of Dream Street called The Biggest Fan. I have a pumpkin latte because we don't have Starbucks in my city. We have Espresso House, and they don't do pumpkin spice lattes. They do pumpkin lattes because I guess pumpkin spice is a trademark, but this doesn't have any pumpkin in it. It just tastes like a regular pumpkin latte. So So I've been trying to figure out where I should start this video and where I should start this series, and I think it makes the most sense to start with what the internet and pop culture was like in 2001. So back then, we didn't have social media in the way that we have it now, but there were versions of social media. We had AOL chat rooms. And those AOL chat rooms sometimes were generated automatically by AOL, but anyone could actually make their own chat room. So you could search for a chat. You could open AOL Instant Messenger and just join a chat room if you knew the name. So some people would just randomly join different chats, and you'd meet people that way. And most people there were lying about who they were and just trying to get you to talk to them about sex. But on the off chance that someone wasn't lying, you might actually be able to find a community through those chat rooms. In the case of pop culture at the time, it was a lot of boy bands and a lot of pop stars. And I loved all of them. Every single one. This was right after Britney and NSYNC Mania, or in the middle of it, technically. So every record label, every producer, everyone who had a stake or a dream of being successful in the music industry was trying to recreate the success of NSYNC or Britney Spears or Backstreet Boys. So because of this, there were tons of boy bands and tons of pop stars at the time, and all of them were trying to find different ways to stand out. At some point, somebody realized that the traditional formula of just putting five okay looking young guys who can kind of sing together and hope it works wasn't enough. You had to find new ways of selling that and selling the product. You couldn't just count on selling the songs to radios or MTV or whatever. You had to do something to really stand out. In the case of Dream Street, they did that with infomercials, and it was cool. So in the 90s, the only kind of albums you'd see being advertised on TV like this were like Pure Moods Volume 1 or Jock Jams or just compilations of songs where like you want like 3 of the songs on that record, but they put 17 there, so you're really paying for the 3 songs you like and the rest are kind of filler. Although to be fair, those compilations were a really good way to find songs you might not have necessarily known before. But the thing about those is that they were always really expensive. So if a CD in the stores would cost like $12 or $15, the CDs on TV would be like 20 for no apparent reason. In the case of Dream Street, they advertised that album a lot on Nickelodeon, which as most of you probably know was a channel for young children. The infomercial promised you all kinds of stuff. A magazine, a CD single, all of this for the low, low price of $19, which in today's money is $28, which is a lot of dollars. But it worked. It worked a lot. And Dream Street were continuously on Nickelodeon as guests on Slamtime Live and other programs that were directed for kids in the afternoon for a couple of months. They were all over Nick. They also had one of their songs used on the Pokemon the Movie 2000 soundtrack. It was a version of their song called They Don't Understand, except they add the word Pokemon at the end, and it's great. It's a jam. So Dream Street themselves were a bunch of young guys. I think at the time that they got together, they were between 12 and 14, and by the time they broke up, they were closer to 17. This also led to some interesting changes in their music throughout their careers, since they had to record new versions of several of their songs because the members of the band's voices had changed over time. So their songs I Say Yeah and Jennifer Goodbye, for example, have the older versions where they sound like very young children, and the newer versions where they sound still like children, but children who've gone through puberty. So how do I fall into all of this? Well, in 1999, I saw an A-Teens music video on Nickelodeon, and I was captivated. I was 8 years old and obsessed with the dancing, the sheer aesthetic. It was a cover of ABBA's Mamma Mia, and I was just here for it. And from that point forward, I loved pop music. And not just like Britney Spears pop, but like pop. The more bubblegum, the better. So at that point, I also decided that I wanted to be a pop star. Except I was really bad at dancing because I'm blind. So, oopsies. And I'm also not that great at singing. But back then I wasn't so bad. But my desire to be a pop star, and more specifically a bubblegum pop star, led me to investigate a lot of stuff. I've always been really into rabbit holes, so I'd hear a song once on the radio, probably the only time it was played on the radio if it was a more obscure bubblegum act, or I'd see the music video for 5 seconds on Nickelodeon in the afternoon, and I'd ask my mom for the album. And because I wasn't allowed to play sports, all of my allowance money, rather than going to uniforms or sporting equipment, went to CDs. So by the time 2002 came around, I had a pretty massive CD collection of one-hit wonder boy bands, girl bands, and pop singers, and I loved all of it earnestly. It was serious to me. I wasn't ashamed. In 2001, I actually wrote a song about how much I love S Club 7 and why I think it's ridiculous that adults wouldn't understand that, and thank God the internet did not exist in my house at that time. Oh my god. So fast forward to 2002. I'd seen Dream Street on Nickelodeon, but I had been kind of turned off by just how young they looked and sounded. I was mature, you see. I was into the Westlifes and the A1s of the world. Men. 21-year-old men, not boys. But at some point it occurred to me that maybe I should just give Dream Street a try. And I remembered one of my best friends in school at the time, Suzanne, had the CD. So I asked if I could buy it from her, and she said sure. So I bought it for like $5 or something, and I took it home and I listened to it, and it really grew on me. This was about the time that we got dial-up internet in my mom's house, so I was spending more and more time online, lonely, of course, because I didn't have any friends. I knew about Chatrooms, so I started to investigate if there were chat rooms for artists I like. At the time, I spent a lot of time in the browser-based Mandy Moore chat room, which was a thing back then. I was really into Mandy Moore at one point as well, and it was a weird place, and I don't recommend it. But I wanted to see if there were some on AOL, since I wouldn't have to always have my browser open at the time, since my internet, again, was 56K dial-up. So I started typing random chat room names in one day, and I typed in Dream Street, and to my surprise, there was a chat room full of people. Now, I was 11 or 12 at this point, and as most 11 and 12-year-olds with keyboards, I was not the most enjoyable person to be around. In fact, I found an Angel Fire website recently that had chat logs from, I think, 2003 based on my AOL screen name, which would have put me at 12 or 13, and oh my god, I am so sorry, everyone. But at the time, people aged 11 through 16 or so didn't really have any other way to meet people or keep up with people other than school, and those chat rooms provided our first real sense of community, even if we all did act like total jerks to each other for no apparent reason. Even though we were trolling each other and not always the nicest, I wanted to hang out in the Dream Street chat room every day because that's where the closest thing to friends I had were. In my school, there were only about 5 people who knew who Dream Street were, and of those 5 people who knew, I was the only one who actually liked them. Same thing with A-Teens and S Club 7 and all of the other bubblegum pop that I was listening to at the time. I spent a lot of time in that chat room talking about Dream Street, and some of the talk was innocuous and some of it was weird. Really, really weird. You know, we like to, as a society, be really hard on One Direction fans and K-pop stans, and pretend like society is falling apart and that this kind of fandom culture is somehow a new thing. But this stuff was happening already in like 2002 and probably even before then. I was born in 1990, so I didn't spend a whole lot of time in chat rooms in the 90s, but I'm sure there were weird Backstreet Boys chat rooms on IRC or something in like 95 where 13-year-old girls would talk about their very strange fantasies about what they would do with Nick Carter. I don't doubt it. The Dream Street chat room was a really interesting place. We were all pretty young. I think the oldest person in the chat was 16, and I was probably one of the youngest, or at least the one who admitted to being the youngest. Most people on AOL lied. And what I found really interesting about the Dream Street chat was just how many of us wanted to be pop stars. Like, this was a thing. There were a lot of girls in that chat and some guys who had aspirations of actually being successful pop artists. Some of them even claimed to have been in girl bands. Some of them had like fake girl bands that they made GeoCities websites for, and they would get trolled really badly for that, and that was really mean in retrospect, and I'm sorry if I ever said anything rude. Some of us would like open the audio recorder that was built into Windows XP and record like these 30-second audio clips of us singing along to songs or singing a cappella to songs. Like I remember one day I recorded myself singing Is It Love by Play, which I think is not even originally a Play song, and sending it to a bunch of the girls from the Dream Street chat and being like, what do you think? So we were dead serious. We had these crazy dreams. And we all loved pop music, and that's what brought us together. I remember what some of the people I met from that chat, I used to spend like hours on the phone with. Like one girl, we would just talk on the phone, sing to each other, talk about our favorite girl bands and rumors. One of the people from the chat I'm actually still friends with to this day. I've never met her in person, but like we've been Facebook friends since I joined Facebook, and we still talk sometimes. I actually consulted her before making this video. So, and like that was almost 20 years ago, which is really hard to believe. Some of the people from that chat went on to have quite tragic stories and have since passed away. One of the people from that chat ended up being a MySpace celebrity, and I'm not going to name him for personal reasons, but he sent me a love letter once, and I still have it, but I don't want to out him. Sorry. It was a fun time, and I definitely want to do more videos about old AOL fan communities in the future. But the reason I'm talking about this now in the case of Dream Street is because I feel that the Dream Street fandom would not have been nearly as big without the online community that they had. And that they were one of the first boy bands to really have the online fandom, at least to my knowledge. So fast forward to later in 2002. I had just gotten a little bit of inheritance money from my grandfather and grandmother who had passed away the year before, about $1,000, which was more money than I'd ever seen before. My dad pulled me aside and said, you can have this $1,000 and either do something really cool with it or put it in a savings account and have it sit there until you're 25. What do you think 12-year-old me decided? The day before, I had found out that Chris Trousdale, one of the members of Dream Street, and who was also my favorite member of Dream Street, would be coming to Philadelphia, which was 3 hours away, to have a gig and also premiere the movie he was a part of called The Biggest Fan. And I was here for it. And I said to my dad, I want to go see Dream Street. Now, longtime viewers of my channel will know that my dad and my brother are also visually impaired. And in order for us to get anywhere, somebody would have to drive us. So my dad proposed this crazy idea that why not take a limousine to go to Philadelphia, 3 hours away, to see the premiere of the Chris Trousdale movie. And I was 12, and I was like, that's a great idea. So I went to school the next day, and I told everyone that I was going to take a limo to see Chris Trousdale. And first of all, they were like, who is Chris Trousdale? And then they were like, no, you're not, you're lying. And I was like, okay. But I told the chat, and I don't actually remember the chat's reaction. I had kind of not lied about my life in the chat before, but definitely played up aspects about myself in the chat before, as you do when you're 12 and unsupervised online. So I think at that time, not everyone believed me. But there was one other member of the chat who was from Philadelphia who was also going to be there. So we were like, hey, that's cool, we're going to meet. So fast forward to the day, I still remember it was December 29th, 2002. Me, my dad, my brother, my dad's girlfriend, and her two kids, who one of them was a juggalo and the other one didn't know anything about music, all hopped into the limousine and drove 3 hours to Philadelphia. Me, the juggalo, and the youngster. The younger daughter actually ended up going to the gig with me, even though she had no idea what was going on. I tried to get the juggalo to come, but for some reason she just wasn't interested. So we pulled up to the theater. I don't remember where the place was. I'm sure some Google detectives can figure this out. We drove up to the place, and we parked the limo right in front. And I went inside with this girl, and apparently, unbeknownst to me, my dad and his girlfriend had not driven away, just in case, I don't know, something happened to their two 12-year-old daughters. So they had stayed in the limousine outside of the event. And people were coming up to the limo and like taking pictures with it and taking pictures of it. And the limo driver was just going with it. And in retrospect, I feel really bad about this because there's probably someone out there who has pictures with a limousine from that day and is like, this is me and Chris Trousdale's limo, and it's my dad. I'm so sorry. I don't know why they did that, but they did, and it sucks. So people were taking 2002 selfies, I guess. Not really selfies, but like Polaroid instant cameras or disposable 1 hour photo things, whatever, pictures. It's not selfies, it's 2002. So we went inside, and I can't remember, did Chris perform or not? I have a really hard time remembering this. I remember the movie very vividly, but I don't remember much else about actually being in there until what happened after the movie. So after the movie, they announced there's going to be a meet and greet with Chris Trousdale and Kayla Amira. Kayla Amira was the co-star of the film. And I was like, oh my god, this is everything I've ever wanted. Now I'm going to meet Chris Trousdale, who, by the way, was my favorite member. And that was interesting because I always had this assumption that Jesse McCartney was like the Justin Timberlake of Dream Street, and I still kind of think that way because Jesse McCartney had the most mainstream success after Dream Street's breakup. But according to the internet, like, Chris had the biggest cult following, which is really surprising because I just didn't expect it. And at the time, I just thought I was the weirdo for liking Chris. So, like I said, they have the meet and greet, and I'm standing in line, and I don't remember exactly the moments leading up to this, but what I do remember was that I accidentally kissed him. And not just like I grabbed his face like some weirdo, like we turned our heads at the wrong time and our lips met. And that happened. And then he laughed about it, and then he kissed my cheek. And there were a bunch of people standing there, and I was 12 and had never received any attention of any kind from any member of the opposite sex before, and I died. There's the picture of me with him that I'm going to put right here, where you can see that my face is bright red, and I look absolutely, completely dead. Because I was. And apparently that happened to someone else. I remember going back to the Dream Street chat room after this happened and writing there that, oh my god, I just kissed him, but not like that. And someone else said that happened to them as well. So, I don't know, maybe he was just really awkward, relatable. After that, I met Kayla, or Kyla, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but she was super nice. And so we drove back in our limousine home, and I maxed out the rest of my camera film so I could go to the 1 hour photo the next day because I'm old, and develop the pictures so I could scan them and then email them to my chat room friends to prove that I had met Chris Trousdale. Because there was no Facebook or Instagram back then. And that's the story about how my first kiss was technically with Chris Trousdale of Dream Street. Oops. So, The Biggest Fan as a film is not great. I'm actually really surprised that like Jamie French or Todd in the Shadows has not talked about this film yet, because it just seems like something they would. Well, maybe not Todd in the Shadows. This isn't cool enough. But Jamie, you have to do this for Makeup and Mondays. I think it's called Makeup and Movie Mondays. That's what it's called. So the film centers around Debbie Warden. I watched the movie the other day with my friend for the first time since 2002 in that movie theater in Philadelphia. And I had some thoughts. So the whole movie feels like a mix between a self-insert fanfiction that literally I wrote in 2002 and something that a man in his 50s at the time wrote based on his own childhood and how he perceives fangirls of the time act and assumes what they would want to watch. It's a weird mix. So, first of all, the strangest thing about this film for me is the names of the characters. So, the main character's name is Debbie, presumably short for Deborah. She's 15 in 2002, which means she would have had to have been given the name Deborah in 1987, which I just don't believe. Her older brother, who is 16, so born in 1986, is named Garfield. I don't think anyone has been given the name Garfield in a very long time. I was in middle school at the time of this film's release, and the only person I knew named Debbie was a middle-aged teacher, and I still to this day haven't actually met anyone named Garfield, so naming choices were a little bit interesting here. Debbie lives in California with her loving parents. Her mother is a teacher at her school, and her dad is a postman who only owns one pair of shorts. Debbie is obsessed with Dream Street and only Dream Street and doesn't do anything else except for hang out in her room with her cardboard Chris Trousdale cutout, which, okay, relatable. There's a lot to say about this movie otherwise. The acting is not great. Mr. Miyagi is in it and plays a really racist stereotype of a generic Asian character, and every time he comes on screen, they play this sound, which is just like, why would you do that? There's 2 police officers from the Police Academy film in the movie, and this whole sequence with Mr. Miyagi and the police officers has absolutely no point other than they suspect that Mr. Miyagi, that's not his name in the film, they suspect that Mr. Miyagi kidnapped Chris Trousdale, and every so often they just cut to these interrogation scenes, presumably to lighten the mood, and I just don't get it, and it's so unnecessary. There's some really questionable humor in the film as well. Like, there's a scene where we get introduced to the bullies of the film, and they're sitting at a lunch table with what I presume are these football player jock kind of guys, and they make comments about how the girls don't eat, and it's supposed to be really funny that they don't eat. And a couple scenes later, Debbie's best friend calls one of them chubby, and they're not chubby. Look at me, I am chubby, and I was reminded of this weird trend in pop culture in the early 2000s where, like, joking about eating disorders was just seen as, like, normal and okay, and everyone understood it was, like, a serious thing if someone had an eating disorder, but it was also hilarious, and I just don't get it. I'm really glad that we've moved on past that in society. So the whole point of the film is that Debbie is obsessed with Chris Trousdale, and there's a Dream Street concert in LA that's sold out, and Debbie wants to go, but she doesn't have tickets, so she and her friend go and buy tickets from a scalper who is like the coolest character in the whole film. He smokes a cigarette, so you know he's a bad guy, and he charges them 500 euros for 2 third-row tickets to see Dream Street, which is more than I paid for front row tickets to see Westlife at the O2 Arena in London last year, so I'm very curious to see what people paid for them regularly. But because the bad cigarette man is a scalper, the tickets were for the previous night's gig, which it actually doesn't make sense at all because there's no mention anywhere in the film that there was a gig the night before. I understand that this happens on a Friday, or this gig is supposed to happen on a Friday, which would have meant the day before would have been Thursday, so that would have presumably been a less popular night. But if there was a second concert, why was it so important for you to get tickets to Friday's concert? I don't know. Anyway, they don't get in. Debbie's really sad, and she goes to sleep. And while this is happening, Chris Trousdale is sick. And I was really uncomfortable watching this film given recent events. Because Chris tragically passed away in June. Due to a thing that I can't say the name of or I'll get demonetized, which would have been completely preventable if the American government functioned. And I'm really sad about it, and I felt really weird actually watching the film and watching this plot point, knowing what ended up happening in real life. But he's sick, and his mom, I think, and his bodyguard, who is a little bit too cuddly with him, by the way, try to give him different kinds of medicines and treatments, and they don't work. And I guess he's either like in a fever dream or high on the medicine they gave him, and I don't know, he steals the band's tour bus, crashes it into Mr. Miyagi's yard, and stumbles upstairs into Debbie's room, into her bed. Like I said, I'm pretty sure Jenny Nicholson has, like, read a fan fiction about this from Wattpad. This sounds like a very similar to, like, a Josh Hutcherson on an island situation. It's like something I would have written when I was 12. And I'm not even ashamed to admit that. Again, thank God my Westlife fanfictions never actually made it out of my notebook and onto a computer. So, Debbie wakes up, Chris Trousdale's in her bed, she calls her best friend, because she's an innocent Christian girl, and that's her first reaction. Her best friend is like, oh my God, you're lying. Then they have this weird thing where, like, her family comes in, so she throws him off the bed and is, like, hiding him. And then they're basically dating after, like, 10 minutes. She makes him breakfast, and they have all these weird exchanges, and he just, like, hangs out in her room. He decides that he doesn't want to be a pop star anymore, and he wants to move in. And Debbie's like, I have a sleeping bag, you can stay with me. And I'm just like, oh, honey, even at 12, I was like, oh, honey, don't put him in the sleeping bag. So he basically moves in, and she hides him from her family, and he starts going to her school, where he gets to see how mean girls are to her. And I'm leaving a lot out here, but it's very self-fulfilling. Like I said, he ends up taking her to the prom, which for some reason prom is on a Tuesday in this very fancy Los Angeles school. And he tells the bullies to stop being mean to Debbie, and they dance to this romantic song. And then the manager of the band the bodyguard of the band finds them at the school and takes Chris back. And then he goes on the radio and says that he dedicates the song to Debbie because she knows who he really is. And then fast forward to the next Dream Street concert, because apparently Dream Street just has lots of concerts in Los Angeles in a very short period of time. And Debbie and her friend go to the ticket counter, and the ticket girl asks them to prove that she is Debbie, not with, like, an ID card, but by answering a trivia question about who is Garfield, because presumably Debbie's brother is dating the ticket girl or something. He's like played up in the film as some kind of ladies' man. He hangs out in a Hugh Hefner robe for, like, all of the movie and makes snarky comments and has a pipe, and it's just weird. It's a weird character. It's also one of my favorites, but it's weird. So she says Garfield is my brother, and then she takes the backstage passes and front row tickets that should have belonged to the bully characters and gives them to Debbie and her friend. And later on, the ticket counter lady explains that apparently this was Chris's own will that these tickets were changed. But, like, okay, so I don't technically work in the music industry, but, like, I've been around, okay? And if your name is on the guest list, or someone's name is on the guest list, and you give another person the tickets and passes that were meant for that person on the guest list, you are going to get fired. Don't do that. Even if you don't like those people, don't do that. The concert's starting. Debbie and her friend are backstage, and her friend is like, go to him, he's waiting for you. So as they sing With All My Heart, which is the song they've been teasing for the whole film, Debbie runs out right in time for the last chorus, and they hug, and the movie ends with them kissing, and then Debbie, or Kyla, or whatever, has this weird narration at the end about miracles do happen, and then she says, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, as if someone doubted her. The line makes no sense, and it bothers me that that's how the film ends. The acting in the film's not that great. I think it's Kayla Amira's first role. Chris isn't so bad in the film, but I think he's done Broadway before and other musicals and stuff, so he's experienced on stage in some way. The other thing that was weird about this movie is that no one else in Dream Street really exists or matters in this universe. Like, they don't talk, and you only see them when they're rehearsing and on stage, which seems really strange, because, like, at the end of the day, this movie is about Dream Street, and Chris isn't the only one who sings. It's not like a Westlife situation where Mark and Shane do, like, 90% of the singing. They all kind of shared singing, so I don't really understand that. Also, some of the dialogue is just weird. Like, there's this one scene where we're first introduced to Debbie's friend Charlotte, where she goes, hey! And then 5 seconds later, she goes up to the car and again says, hey, Charlotte! And I don't know, it just reminded me of The Room, kind of. Like, it felt like an oh hi Mark moment. It's not the worst film I've ever seen, and it's not even the worst music movie I've ever seen. Like, I definitely think it's better than Glitter, the Mariah Carey film, but it's not good. And I kind of remember why. It's not the worst film I've ever seen, but it's just very silly, and the way it's written just feels so, like I said in the beginning, out of touch in a lot of ways. Like, it definitely felt like this is how the writer assumes young people are, especially 15-year-olds in 2002. The lack of internet-related stuff in that whole movie is just really odd to me as well. Because by that point, most young people had some kind of access to a computer and were doing at least something online. So that's not brought in at all. Also, there's a scene where Chris is going through her CDs and he finds Destiny's Child and Plus One, which I think is a very great reference. So Plus One was a Christian boy band whose name means that the plus one in their group is Jesus, and I might do a video about them, but I'm really glad that Plus One got a name drop in this film. There's also a scene where, like, Debbie goes to church with her family, including her brother, who is basically portrayed the entire time as, like, a sex hound. So that's cool. So after the screenings of this movie, it kind of disappeared for a while. It was really hard to track down for a couple years. I think at one point I actually did try to, like, get a copy, but it wasn't released on DVD until 2005, and it's not available on any streaming services. I was only able to watch it because there's a potato quality rip of it on YouTube. If you like bad movies and you have an hour and a half of your life to spare, and especially if you remember Dream Street at all from that era, I definitely recommend watching the movie. It's a really good way to spend your time. The other thing I really liked about the movie at the time was the soundtrack. Which I still have. This soundtrack has a bunch of new versions of Dream Street songs, like I mentioned at the beginning, because they had to re-record a bunch of them after their voices changed. There's also the track that Chris Trousdale did with the Swedish girl group Play, I'm Gonna Make You Love Me, which is a banger. Play was great, let's all be real here. Then there's also songs on here from a girl band called Ruby Blue, who no one remembers. And who don't apparently exist according to the internet. I've found mention of them on a blog called The Island of Forgotten Pop Stars, which I love, and And my mom bought me a newspapers.com subscription just so I could look through and try to see if anyone ever wrote about these girls anywhere. No one did. And they released one album, and then they had a couple of those album tracks on here. So I bought the album because I wanted to try to figure out who these people are and what else they've done. And one of them is now like a really famous indie artist in a group called Sleigh Bells, who apparently is a friend of a friend also. So that's kind of cool how small the world is. But otherwise, I don't know what any of these girls are doing now. But their songs on this album are actually my favorite. They're really kind of cheesy pop songs from the time, but that was what I was into. And I've been listening to this soundtrack actually leading up to this video a lot just to get myself back into the mindset that I was in at the time. And those Ruby Blue tracks slap. Like, they're great, and they're the best part of this other than the collaboration track with Play. So I know it probably seems really weird to have like a pumpkin spice latte with ice, but trust me when I tell you, whatever syrup Espresso House uses for these tastes so much better cold, and I don't know why. So after my encounter with the biggest fan and meeting Chris, I kind of fell out of the Dream Street fandom, but I didn't stop going into the Dream Street chat. And if I remember correctly, the Dream Street chat stuck around until like 2005, until the MySpace days, and I think then we all kind of went our separate ways. But we stayed going into that chat room for way longer than anyone was actually interested in Dream Street. The community was important to us, and even though everyone kind of liked to pretend that we had lives and normal relationships outside of AIM, I think most of us didn't. And that's why we stayed there, for the camaraderie. At the same time, I had started to join other chat rooms and other forums. I joined the 18s.com message board because I was really into the 18s, and I ended up becoming a moderator there, which started a lifelong tradition of me moderating forums. I was in the Good Charlotte chat room for a while. I don't know. I hung out in different online communities for a while. But the craziest thing for me that came out of my time in the Dream Street fandom wasn't that my first kiss was with Chris Trousdale, but the fact that the Dream Street fandom, nothing else, not even my brother's influence, is why I got into punk rock and why I'm still into punk rock. I kid you not. So, because there were some older people in the Dream Street chat room who had lives beyond boy bands, they would post links to different bands. So stuff like Story of the Year, Something Corporate, The Starting Line. I found Drive-Thru Records bands from the Dream Street fandom in like 2002. And because of that, I would end up going on to be a street team leader for Drive-Thru Records and end up, booking punk rock shows and being part of this DIY thing up until I moved to Finland. And even now, some of my favorite bands are still bands I found at that time, like The Starting Line and New Found Glory. So, yeah. We were a diverse group of people who liked a lot of different things beyond just pop music and boy bands. But at the end of the day, the Dream Street chat was sort of like our safe space for being able to openly discuss our bubblegum fandoms. I was really into Jump 5 too at the time, and that was one of the few places where it was okay to talk about Jump 5. You could openly talk about any kind of music you liked in there, and you'd probably get trolled by somebody, but there would also probably be someone who liked it. And because this predated YouTube and Spotify, you couldn't just be like, hey, go check this out somewhere. If you wanted someone to hear it, you'd have to, send them to the artist's website and hope they'd have, a Real Player plugin thing where they could watch the music video. I also recently tried to find out what Kayla Amira was up to, the Debbie from the film, and I found a Twitter account that said the George Floyd protests were unnecessary, so then I stopped looking. So that's my foray into the Dream Street fandom and the biggest fan. I really hope you liked this video. Next week, I'm going to be posting my interview with Amanda, who had a song on the Rugrats in Paris soundtrack and a minor radio hit with the track Everybody Doesn't, and is also the sister of Anise from Play. I'm actually the first person that Amanda has done an interview with since she left music. So this is a really big deal, and I really hope you guys are as excited for it as I am. Let me know in the comments if you like this series. I want to talk more about Play and all these other bands from that era as well, but only if there's a market for it. So please let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye! So I just finished filming, but I was thinking about what I said in terms of finding punk rock bands through the Dream Street chat room, and I realized that I found Fall Out Boy through Dream Street as well, because around the time Grand Theft Autumn came out, someone had talked about Fall Out Boy in the chat, and I had then done my own research and found them and bought the album, and I've been listening to Fall Out Boy since 2003 as well. So, yeah, Dream Street made me an OG Fall Out Boy fan.